I just genuinely think that Anthony Joshua has got so much to lose this year. His rematch with Alexander Usyk, if indeed they make that fight, is absolutely massive for his future. He has to win that fight. A loss, and he's done in this division.
Welcome everyone to the Dazn Boxing Show. Myself, Adi Oladipo, former WBC Cruiserweight champ, Tony Bellew. Loads to talk about this week. We're going to discuss the announcements of all those wonderful, glorious big fights by Dazn. We're going to hear from the boys of Fight Disciples and what they do and don't want to see in 2022. And we're going to talk about the retirement from boxing of young Kash Farooq as well. But first, it's time for Opening Bell. I mentioned it there, Tony. I think it's probably the best place to start now. The sad news that Kash Farooq unfortunately had to retire from boxing. Fantastic bantamweight, retires with a record of 16-1. That one being Lee McGregor. There was a lot of talk about them getting on again this summer, which would have been a big fight for both of them. Look, we don't know the ins and outs of why he's had to retire, but he has released a statement on his social media saying, you know, he's done his medicals, something's come in the medicals, and unfortunately he's had to retire for the sake of his own health. Just before we talk about Kash Farooq in itself, Tom, what is that scenario like doing your medicals? There's going to be a lot of fans at home watching this and not understanding how often you have to do your medicals, what comes up in your medicals.
So I'll speak about it from personal experience, and then I'll elaborate a little bit more from fighters that I've managed and where we've had issues with brain scans and certain things that have come back. So from a personal perspective, my brain scans, I've done 12 in my 12-year professional career, or 13 years, whatever it was, and every one of them came back well. I never had any kind of issues, no shadows, no brain movement, no nothing. Now, that's very rare after so many brain scans, but I know why it didn't come back with me. It's because there's not a brain in there, it's just a block of wood, but that's just me. So what happened is you go every year, you go for your annual medical. You go and have a brain scan, you go and have bloods checked, everything gets run through your body, you have a physical and a doctor sees you, everything like that. Now, upon that MRI scan, it's the most horrendous thing. Like I'm an extremely claustrophobic person. You get stuck in the MRI, you're in there for 15 minutes. It's dum 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 for anyone who's had them. It's horrible. It's horrifying. It's like being stuck in a coffin. And as I say, it can be very, very tough to take part in. But you've got to get it done. And the boxing board are very adamant on that. And you will see. And every year, they can go back to previous brain scans and have a look at them. Now, what I assume has happened with Paul Kash is there's been movement in a brain, or he's got some kind of shadow, or he could have had possibly a bleed that they've missed. You don't necessarily get it straight after the fight. It could have happened in a sparring session, it could have been a bang on the head, it could have been in a car crash, it could have been a number of things. But once they see that show up on the scan, they'll call you in, they'll have ask for a second opinion, and that's how it'll go. So I really feel for them, Adi, I really do. And the board, I must give them the credit here. They're brilliant when it comes to your medical well-being and your health. They really, really are. They're second to none. And for Kash, you know, I can only, you know, my heart goes out to him. It really does. Such a brilliant fighter with such a promising future in career. After that one scrap with Lee McGregor, we couldn't wait to see the rematch. But, you know, this is just very unfortunate, and these things are in place for a reason. His health and his wealth is much more important than entertaining everybody on a Saturday night or in a rematch with Lee McGregor. So my thoughts are with him, but make this life after boxing, believe you me, and you go out there and find it and give back or do whatever you want to do. But I just wish him well, Adi. It's such a tough one for the box to take, because what people don't understand is these lads give their life to the sport of boxing. It's not, when you get into professional boxing, it's not about the money, because the money isn't there at the start. It's just about a young man chasing a dream of one day becoming a world champion, a British champion, European, Commonwealth, whatever it have you. Each and every fighter has their own specific goal, and Kash Farooq was well on his way to seeing that journey through of one day maybe becoming a world champion, and he's had it cut short by unforeseen, drastic and very heartbreaking circumstances. So many thoughts go out to him and all fighters who have gone through similar things.
Yeah, indeed, and well said there, Tone. Only 26 as well, so He's just stepping into that right prime of his career. We saw him fight at Fight Camp recently in an exciting fight against a young Mexican. So look, it's a massive shame, but we do wish Kash all the success in his future career, whether that still will be in boxing, which we hope it is. Obviously knows the sport inside out, so fingers crossed he stays in boxing as well, especially in that Scottish market, to really build that back up once again. I want to quickly go stateside. We were talking about the fights we want to see in 2022, and I think if you ask any boxer, probably the number one fight everyone seems to say is Errol Spence versus Crawford. That's the big fight. It's number one versus number two, however you want to put it, at the welterweight division. They both got really all the belts apart from one. Yordenis Ugas has the other belt. Tim Smith, Executive Vice President of PBC, did an interview recently on a podcast, and he was asked about Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford. Bear in mind, Terence Crawford no longer with Top Rank, so you hope these fights can be made. And he basically has said, and look, I'm trying to paraphrase this for him. He's basically said that there isn't enough money in this fight for Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford hasn't been built up as a draw. He's not a draw. And he doesn't want to disrespect Terence Crawford by giving him a low ball offer. And that almost puts the final nail in the coffin for that fight. I almost felt like the only reason this fight wasn't happening, Tony, was because he was with top ranked Terence Crawford. That if he now decides to become a free agent, it's easier to make. It looks like that isn't going to happen. And two questions here. Why isn't Terence Crawford a draw? Because I think he's fantastic outside the ring when he shows his personality, and inside the ring is one of the best boxers we've seen in this generation. And number two, now it can't happen. What for Terence Crawford? What does he do? I mean, is it Josh Taylor? I mean, does he look to go to 154? What does he do?
Well, to clarify straight up on point one, Terence Crawford is a draw. Do you know why he's a draw? Because he beats everybody, and he beats them well. That's why he's a draw. Now, Errol Spence is also a draw, make no mistake about it. If Errol Spence was this big box office huge draw, why did he have to get on a plane to come to Sheffield to challenge Kell Brook? Huge stars don't go abroad to travel to fight someone on their own shores. Do we see Canelo travel? We don't see huge mega pay-per-view stars travel. So make no mistake, Errol Spence and Terence Crawford are both on the same level of superstardom. They're both amazingly gifted, talented fighters. That cannot be disputed. But when it comes to their ranking amongst the fans and the draw that both of the fighters have, they're pretty much on the same kind of spectrum, are they? They're both. No one wants to face either of them.
Yeah.
No one can beat either of them, and they actually now are at a point in their careers where they need each other. And Tim Smith needs a reality check and someone to say to him, listen, mate, Errol Spence has nowhere to go and Terence Crawford has nowhere to go. So you know what the best thing to do is? I'll tell you what, all the sanctioning bodies need to just go, we are calling Terence Crawford as Errol Spence's mandatory. Yep. Errol Spence, we are calling Terence Crawford as your mandatory. And you know what? We're going to go to purse bids.
Yeah, it's got to happen.
So we just stick it out to purse bids.
Force it to happen.
And then, believe you me, when we go to purse bids, you will see how big that fight is. Yeah. Because that's a $50-60 million fight, no questions asked. And it should just be, you've got belts, he's got belts, they get stuck in, and it's a 50-50 split. And I guarantee you now, the purse bid will be huge. Because whoever puts it on understands and knows that. But Al Heyman and PBC is fantastic at businessmen as they are, and they do put on some great shows and they do put on great fights. They want to keep it all in-house. Now, I'll put my bottom dollar on it that if one of the sanction bodies comes out and says, right, we've got to put these guys out on purse bids, he'll vacate. And he will vacate on the advice of Al Heyman and this Tim Smith. And that's such a disgraceful shame. This is why boxing goes so wrong at times, because the politics get involved in it. It doesn't matter where Terence Crawford is. He's a free agent right now. You have no problem making the fight happen. This is what Eddie Hearn is trying to do and create at DAZN. We're trying to put on fights. They don't necessarily have to be matchroom fighters. It can just be two fighters who are with foreign promoters, but Eddie wins a purse bid. He just wants to put on great fights. This is why we're getting shock after shock. This is why we're getting upset after upset at DAZN, because it's not about a stable or a certain promotional outfit growing. It's about the great fights happening. We want to see shocks. We want to see upsets. We don't want to see 90-10 fights every week. We don't want to see 80-20 fights every week. We want to see 60-40s, 55-45s. And it doesn't get no more 50-50 than Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. We need to see it.
Shame. It is a shame. Nice segue there, Tony, as well. You mentioned the fights that DAZN are putting on, some 50-50 fights, some 60-40 fights. And we've got it, right? DAZN have released their schedule for fights we've got coming up in the next couple of months, starting in February until the back end of March. And there's some really good ones, right? Some really exciting fights that fans can't wait to see. It all kicks off over here, which is nice in the UK. Alexander Palace. We've not been to Alexander Palace for a boxing event for such a long time. I grew up watching fights in Alexander Palace. It was Alexander Palace and Wembley Arena in London. It wasn't the O2 back then. Obviously, York Hall was still doing what it does. Obviously, it's the home of British boxing. But we get Danny Jacobs versus John Ryder, the gorilla John Ryder. I love that fight. It's a fight I never really expected to see. Danny Jacobs coming off what was a boring fight against Rosado. John Ryder begging for the opportunity. That kicks things off. Not a bad way to kick it off.
Alexandra Palace, a great place. My first fight for Matchroom was Alexandra Palace against Edison Miranda. Darren Barker was supposed. Oh, mate, he could punch as well, believe you me. Yes. He sent one past me whiskers in round 2, and the wind that went past me whiskers was enough to let me know, don't get caught by this boy, because I was making light heavyweight at the time and it wasn't fun. So, you know what? It's a lovely place. I have fond memories of it, but Alexandra Palace is just... I love the atmosphere it creates and the venue. Now, Danny Jacobs will love fighting there. But believe you me, Danny Jacobs is in a hard night's work. Danny Jacobs got his work cut out, because when John Ryder gets on top of you, I don't maybe believe this, Jacobs is not the smaller man, but someone like John Ryder has been in with bigger, stronger fighters than Danny Jacobs. And when he jumps on top of him, believe you me, Jacobs is going to feel it. Because John is a fighter who just doesn't go away. He survives, he stays in the pocket, he gets on top of you, he makes you work when you don't want to work, he makes you box when you don't really want to box and you want to have a fight. He's a problem. We've seen the fight that he gave the brilliant Callum Smith. He pushed Callum Smith all the way. I'm not one of these guys who thinks...
I thought he won it.
See, I'm not one of them guys who thinks he won it now. I understand why you think he won it, Ad. The only reason I don't think he won it is because... Just because a fighter does better in a fight than you actually expect them to, doesn't mean he's won it. Don't get me wrong, he had some fantastic rounds in the Callum Smith fight, and he chose to work on the inside when Callum wanted to try and tie him up and rest at times. But just the harder shots on the night came from Callum Smith. The shots that made John Ryder stop in his boots and think twice about going in, they came from Callum Smith. But, you know, I've seen him in some razor-thin decisions at times. The one against Rocky Fielding comes to mind. But John Ryder is living a kind of Indian summer out. You know, he's getting better with age. He's doing really well. And if anything, I think Jacobs looks like he's on the retreat now, especially after the Rosado fight. I mean, Gabe done well in the fight. I mean, I thought it was one of them ones again where someone does far better than they expect, and has he won it? Gabe had a shout in that fight. There's no two ways about it, but he just didn't get it over the line on the night. But it's a good fight. It's a great way to kick off the year. And Eddie's got it here. We're going to see where Eddie Earn's loyalties lie, because I know he loves John Ryder and he likes giving John Ryder opportunities. But he's not going to want to annoy his American counterpart in Danny Jacobs. He's going to want to give him the opportunity, let him shine. But trust me, Eddie's not going to like putting that on, because I know he likes Danny Jacobs. He's fond of him. And when he gets in there, he's going to have to show what he's all about.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be so many great fights in the next couple of months. We've got Lawrence Okoli in action against Kieslak. We've got Virgil Ortiz, which is going to be a ridiculous one against Mickinson. We don't know if Mickinson can step up for that level. We'll soon find out. Conlon versus Wood, Estrada versus Chocolatito, Munguia versus Ballard. But the one I really want to get your thoughts on, and this is an interesting one, because some people have said, you know, we want to see Warrington versus Lara, that we should see that again. Warrington fights Martinez, obviously coming off that really good win against Kid Galahad. They fight in the Leeds First Direct Arena, which is going to be bouncing. We know what they're like up there. Warrington's got the chance to get his belt back, and he calls it his belt. This is an interesting fight. They fought before. This is a different Kiko, though, isn't it? Kiko's going to be coming super confident, and we don't know where Warrington is when it comes to his mental state, because I thought that fight against Lara, the second fight, was getting a bit tetchy, that fight. So it'd be interesting to see where Warrington is.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, my favourite venue at the minute is Leeds when it comes to the boxing. The atmosphere that them fans generate and create is second to none. It really is. I loved every second of being in that arena. Kiko Martinez is another fighter coming into a bit of an Indian summer. I don't know where these fighters are doing or what kind of sunbeds they're using or what kind of treatment they're using, but I tell you what, they're all living up to the moniker of an Indian summer, and there's none more so than Kiko Martinez. Strong, powerful. He looked like he'd wound the clock back 10 years against Barry Awad. He really did. And I think Josh is going to have to be very wary early doors, and I mean extremely wary. I wouldn't say, because he wasn't gun shy in a lot of fights, which we've seen. No. You know, the ones were whisking past, and me and you were sat next to each other, we heard the noises. When he landed a couple of shots, I was like, oh, you wouldn't think I was a fighter. I sounded like a girl, as the shots were going in. But he's not gun shy. But what I said this to a number of people, I think it will make Josh Warrington a better fighter because he doesn't believe he's invincible anymore. I remember the first time I got beat off Adonis Stevenson and lost. It broke me heart, but it made me such a better and harder fighter to beat because it let me know, listen, I'm vulnerable. I can be hurt. That's the first time I ever got nailed so hard that I could no longer continue in the fight. And for Josh Warrington, he's had that lesson now. And I think against Kiko, he'll go into the fight and you'll see a different performance than the first time he boxed him. I think he'll be reserved and keep him at bay, a distance for about 4 or 5 rounds. And in the second half of the fight, I expect to see Josh Warrington take it up a notch and maybe even stop Kiko Martinez late. So I think it'll be a brilliant fight, a fantastic fight. I'm intrigued by it because I just don't know what's going to happen when Josh Warrington does get nailed again. Is he going to want to bite down on the gum shield? Is he going to want to be a little bit standoffish and see where the world lies for the second? I don't know. And the only way we're going to find out is when the bell goes on that night. And as for Kiko, we know what he's going to do. We know what he's going to bring. He's just bringing violence, maximum violence. So I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, honestly, it's a great fight. It's a great fights that we've got coming up on DAZN. It really is. But I don't know, I'm trying to think of my pick of the fights. It probably is from a hardcore standpoint of view. Probably Chocolatito versus Estrada 3. I think that's going to go down as one of the best trilogies we've ever seen in boxing. All right, now what do you want for 2022? What don't you want from 2022? Let's hear from the boys of Fight Disciples as they discuss their do's and don'ts for the upcoming year.
Let's throw some jabs.
Welcome to Jabs with us, the Fight Disciples. I'm Adam Catterall, he's Nick P. And before the boys and girls return to the ring and start giving us a little bit of action to talk about, I think it's only fair that we talk about the big topics that maybe are on the top of your head as well as we enter 2022. And we'll start in the heavyweight division because there's always conversations as to whether we need unified heavyweight champions of the world. We've got one at the moment, obviously, with Alexander Usyk. But do we need to see him versus Tyson Fury to become the undisputed championship of the world? Now, listen, Nick, I'm going to go first on this, right? Because everybody knows that watches the Fight Disciples. We know full well that we want to bin the belts. We don't need to know, or we don't need real estate to identify to us who the best heavyweight on the planet is. Our eyes tell us who the number one is and who the number two is. So from our point of view and the hardcore fans' point of view, I don't think we do actually need to have an undisputed, say, champion of the world. However, for the growth of the sport with the casual fan, for the football fan, for them to be able to identify who the number one is in a division, I think we do, mate. I think we do need to get Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk in a ring for all 4 sanctioning body belts for them to throw down. So therefore we can have one face at the top of the tree where the person on the street, your grandma, your granddad, or whoever can identify as the heavyweight champion of the world. What say you?
I absolutely agree. And you know me, I hate agreeing with you. I like to go against you, but I completely agree. I think every weight division, you know, that would be the dream, wouldn't it? That would be the dream of boxing, to have a one single face for every single weight division across men and women's boxing. One weight class, one champion, one belt. I'd be all for Lord of the Rings in it. Put all the belts together once you win them. Weld them together like that big throne they had in Game of Thrones, Weld them all together. Just make one big, horribly obnoxious belt and just have that as the undisputed title belt. Can't be broken up anymore. It doesn't matter about, different governing bodies and their ranking system. My goodness. Somebody showed me the WBA's heavyweight ranking system this week, and I tell you what, if that's their ranking system, put that belt in the bin immediately. That's what boxing needs. We need one belt, one weight, one champion, and then it's so easy for everybody. The more important, the pay-per-view paying casual fan that we love on this show, the casual fan can then understand who the number one guy is, and then all we do then is line everybody up behind him. Simple.
That leads me on nicely then to talk about the lightweight division. We have a man with the majority of the real estate in the lightweight division, in George Kambosos. Of course, we bang on that he is undisputed, but because there is actually a debate, that by definition kind of argues the fact that he isn't undisputed, because we are disputing the fact whether he is or he isn't, because there's another belt out there. The franchise situation from the WBC has diluted the whole situation. So that leads me to ask you this question. Do you think these arguments will end by the end of 2022? Will we have one face in the lightweight division to class as the main guy?
I hope so, because, listen, I'm the world's biggest Devin Haney fan, and I believe that Devin Haney's got to go after George Kambosos with every single ounce of muscle that he's got. He's got to grab Eddie, he's got to grab Dazn, he's got to grab everybody in his team and say, that's the guy. I'll go down under if you want me to, or we bring him over to the US. It doesn't matter. Let's get our wallets out. Let's get Kambosos in the ring. And that's how we do it. And I truly believe Devin Haney beats George Kambosos, especially if it's on US soil. I think that home advantage would be fantastic for Devin. And then Devin Haney can unify that division. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. Listen, I'm of the thinking that Kambosos is undisputed right now. But for me, the number one contender, the guy that deserves a shot next, is Devin Haney. Let's make it happen.
Vasyl Lomachenko says no. That's all I'll say on that one. Listen, the star of 2021, without any shadow of a doubt, is Saul Canelo Alvarez. He's the man, and he set that precedent, I suppose, for other champions to follow. He's the one that has chased down every single person in the super middleweight division to create a little bit of history, to become the first guy in the four-belt era to be the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. Do you think he can do it at light heavyweight? Because there's some bigger, better, and harder hitting guys that he's faced at 168.
Yeah, listen, I'm not a huge fan of this move to cruiserweight to take on Mukabu. I know it was talked about before Christmas. Seems to have gone a little bit quiet now. I think Mukabu's got a defence coming in at the end of January. I'm not a fan of that. I don't see the point in it. I don't see the point in jumping up there. That's not Canelo's style, man. Canelo, he systematically worked his way through the 12-stone division last year. It was an absolute marvel to watch, and it left every single fight fan in unison to say, he's the guy at the top of the tree. Not only is he the biggest pay-per-view driver, but he's the champion that has shown every other boxer, never mind champions, but every other boxer in the sport, how this sport should be done, how a champion should behave. I want all the belts. I'm clearing the weight division out. I'd love to see him do 175 now. I think there's great fights out there. No, Joe Smith obviously defends his belt later in January, but Bivol would be a wonderful fight. And then let's be honest, Adam, Canelo versus Beterbiev this summer for all the marbles, top spot at light heavy. Woohoo! Sign me up.
Yeah, listen, it is going to be something special. Ring IQ, I don't think anybody can match him. I think he's only ever going to get defeated by giving away far too many of those advantages, those size and power difference. But listen, he's done it at 168. We used to say that he can't do it at 175. Bring it on. He's setting precedent, and hopefully other champions follow suit with the things that he's been doing. Now, here's a big question for you. Who do you think the star of 2022 is going to be? Who's going to be the person that breaks out, that really captures our imagination? I think the table is set for quite a lot of stars to go and eat. Obviously, we have certain divisions that we've already been speaking about, that heavyweight division, that lightweight division. They're all sat there, and all it needs is one person just to take it by the scruff of the neck and become the king. For me, I think we got a little bit of a glimpse of something at the end of 2021, which kind of leads me into 2022 to lead to who I'm going to class as the star of this particular next 12-month period. I'm going for Shakur Stevenson. I thought at the end of the year against Jamel Herring, he was absolutely mustard. The division's now opened up for him. Unification fights there with the likes of Oscar Valdez, and I think if he can get that fight on, because both of those are in the same stable, he can then move into the lightweight division and maybe take on one of those other big kings, those young guns that everybody keeps talking about. And at the end of the year, I think if we're doing a DAZN awards ceremony, we are going to be classing Shakur Stevenson as maybe the fighter of the year.
It's a really good shout. He's got so much ability, and you're right. He's absolutely going to breeze through weight divisions and certainly go down if he lives up to the potential that he's got. Listen, this time last year I got excited about the lightweight division, the Four Kings, like everybody else. Unfortunately, it just didn't play out like that. I think now Teofimo's gone. Gervonta wants to do anything but fight a really decent rival. Who knows what's going to happen to Ryan Garcia in 2022? And as I say, hopefully Devin Haney's next up for Kambosos. So maybe that will open some doors, and maybe we'll get some big fights in that lightweight division. But for me, it's all about welterweight. It's all about welterweight. Never mind just the two guys at the top of the tree. I want Terence Crawford. I want Errol Spence. I would sell my own grandmother to see that fight tomorrow. Of course I would. But look below them as well. Boots Ennis, Ortiz Jr. and our very own Conor Benn. Welterweight has absolutely got the potential to catch fire this year. Completely and utterly capture the imagination of not just the boxing fan, but the mainstream sports fan. All we've got to do is get those fights on. Terence Crawford's a free agent right now. Let's lock him down. Let's get that fight going with Spence. Then let's get these young prospects moving towards a title opportunity at the end of the year. Imagine Ortiz Jr., Benn, Ennis, even Avanesian, throwing all these names in the mix. There's not a bad fight to be made, that welterweight division. But the key for me is Crawford versus Spence first. Make that one, and then just let the glory explode from there.
Just got me thinking about Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Conor Benn as a stylistic matchup, mate. It's carnage, isn't it? Absolute carnage. What a fight that would be if we could get that on in 2022. And fingers crossed we could get that on in Dazn. Now then, who has got the most to lose over the next 12 months? That's a big question to ask. Now, what you would think here is that it is the person that owns the most at the moment. Obviously, in 2021, Canelo had an absolute stellar year, undisputed champion at super middleweight, now moving up into the light heavyweight division. You would think with him being the pound for pound number one, the star of the show, he's probably got the most to lose, and that argument does indeed stack up. But my argument comes from a career point of view. I think there's one person that is there at this moment in time that could throw it all away this year, and that is in the heavyweight division, and I'm going with Anthony Joshua. I just genuinely think that Anthony Joshua has got so much to lose this year. His rematch with Alexander Usyk, if indeed they make that fight, is absolutely massive for his future. He has to win that fight. A loss, and he's done in this division.
I don't agree, just because I think he's still the biggest name in the heavyweight division. I think he still puts more bums on seats than anything else. I think he's being forced into the Usyk rematch. I personally wouldn't go down that road. But even if he was to lose to Usyk, I think there's still big fights with Wilder, big fights with Dillian White, big fights with other heavyweights certainly coming through. Maybe even Joe Joyce back in the UK. Down the road, that would help AJ rehabilitate. I'm not writing anybody off because of a loss or two, because let's be honest, the losses often define the greatest champions on how they bounce back. My big fear is a fighter you mentioned to me this week, actually, that could lose this year if the big fight gets made, and it's whether she has bounced back again. And of course, I'm talking about Katie Taylor, absolutely the darling of Irish boxing, superstar over here in the UK, staring down the battle of a gun against the biggest fight in her career against Amanda Serrano. If she were to lose that fight, I think Katie Taylor would struggle to bounce back from that, because that's the kind of fight that defines a legacy. So I think the big risk this year is for Katie Taylor and that super fight that we're desperate for her to have. Now, of course, she beats it, she wins that fight, well, that's something completely different. And actually, on the same vein, I think another of the female fighters, the aptly named GWOAT that she calls herself, Clarissa Shields, she's lining up herself to be in line to fight Savannah Marshall. I'll tell you now, Savannah Marshall not only has beaten her before at the World Championships in the amateurs, but punches like a freight train. And I believe if those two girls fight, I think Clarissa Shields loses her undefeated boxing record. And I tell you what, I think she might even quit boxing altogether and focus on MMA.
Well, this whole conversation leads me on to the next 2 points that I want to make. First and foremost, what fight do we most want to see in 2022? I think we're all unanimous with talking about Fury versus Usyk and Crawford versus Spence. That's on everybody's list. But the third fight, everybody has a little bit of a debate. Mine is exactly what you've just said there. The third fight that I want to see is Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor. That is the fight to make. And there's a lot of chat in this game about changing the game. Our own catchphrase here on Dazn is game changers. That's what we're all about. We're here to revolutionize the sport of boxing and take it to the next level. This is the fight to be able to do that, because what we need to do in female sport and elite female boxing is change it from 2-minute rounds to 3-minute rounds. It's a very simple process, and you've got two superstars there to be able to do it. Two beacons of the sport, two champions in their weight divisions. Bring them together to showcase how good this sport can be. Okay, you might have an argument that we can't do 12 rounds. Okay, let's do 10, but let's do 3-minute rounds. Let's have parity for these girls. Let's get them on the same level as the guys. And these girls, I promise you, if you give them that platform, will not let us down. They could give us a Fight of the Year contender.
100%. If it goes that long, and that's the most exciting thing about female boxing to that extra minute, those 3-minute rounds. We will get more viral moments. We will get more stoppages. That's the one thing that Claressa Shields has suffered from throughout her entire career. We will get more big finishes in the female side of the sport if we get the 3-minute rounds. I'm a massive advocate for it. This is the year to make it happen. And you're right, Adam. That is exactly the right fight to springboard the future of the sport for the girls.
In total contrast, the fight that we could do without in 2022, I'm going into the heavyweight division once again. And it's not just because of this particular fight, it's because of how this fight has actually been made. I'm talking about the rematch between Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk. I personally don't need it. And the reason for that is because it's been brought about due to a contractual rematch clause. I want to get rid of all of them. Absolutely no need for contractual rematch clauses whatsoever. The fans will demand whether we have rematches or not. Look at last year. One of the fights of last year, we had Chocolatito taking on Estrada. An absolute barnstormer. Fingers crossed it's getting served up to us again as a rematch in this year. Hopefully the spring of this year, and hopefully it won't be too far away. I just personally believe that contractual rematch clauses hold up divisions. We're getting another semi-final in effect in the heavyweight division. I want to see the final. I don't want to wait for another semi-final to play out before we have to go again. Get rid of contractual rematch clauses, and therefore divisions can become more fluid, and therefore we'll get far more fights where the best take on the best.
Let me tell you now, if you could make Fury versus Usyk next and make a different fight for AJ, do you think that gives us a better chance at the end of the year to see AJ versus Fury finally?
Yes, 100% I do.
So do I.
That's where we all want to go. Final one, and we kind of touched upon this a little bit when we were talking about Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor, and hopefully that fight happening. Do you genuinely think, with the people that are in charge of this sport, that we will get at some point 3-minute rounds for the girls this year?
Yeah, I think we've got to. I think it demands it. The great thing is all those girls, Savannah, Clarissa, Katie, Amanda, they've all banged that drum. They've all said that they openly discussed the fact that they spar 3-minute rounds, they train 3-minute rounds, and then suddenly they get ready for a marathon, and then when they get in there, it becomes a sprint. But I think those are the girls that can force change. They're the ones that can speak to their managers, speak to the promoters, speak to the broadcasters, and say, listen, we want to be doing exactly what the men are doing. Look at, make that comparison to the UFC, where female fighters, female champions compete over the same distance, the same number of minutes, the same number of rounds, and they get more parity, they get more pay-per-view moments. More importantly, they get the viral moments that help them become superstars.
Yeah, and indeed get more money off the back of that as well. Absolutely, we're all on board with it. Listen, hopefully you've enjoyed our little back and forth here on Jabs. We will be back next week as we start to preview some of the fights that are coming up over the next 12 months. And fingers crossed, some of the things that we've just been speaking about do actually play out in the real world. We'll catch you next time.
Always great to hear from the boys of Fight Disciples with what they want and don't want to see in 2022. All right, there's a world title fight this weekend. Joe Smith defends his light heavyweight title against the American Steve Geffrard. This is time for Choose Your Fighter. Tony, this is your former division. A long time ago, Tony. Steve Geffrard.
Long time ago, Abby.
A long time ago. It was supposed to be Joe Smith versus Callum Johnson. That was a voluntary. Obviously, look, very disappointing for Callum Johnson to test positive for COVID. So they have drafted in Steve Geffrard on very, very, very short notice. His record is 18-2. Hasn't lost since 2013. Craig Richards, by the way, wanted this opportunity. I saw him tweeting saying, 5 days, give it to me. Obviously, Craig Richards, we know, fought Dimitri Bivol for a world title last year. So look, Steve Geffrard versus Joe Smith. How much do you give How much of a chance, sorry, do you give the late replacement?
It's hard to tell me, because I'm not going to lie, Christmas and New Year, if you ain't got a fight penciled in, fighters are very, very in the gym. I'm not going to lie. There's no point in bigging them up and telling you, all fighters live in the gym, these in Christmas Day. If you ain't got a fight penciled in, mate, you ain't in the gym. Simple as that. Yes, we're all ticking over and we all have an optimal certain level of fitness for out-of-camp fights, but it's very, very hard for you to be in tip-top fight shape unless he had one scheduled for maybe a week or two's time. Then I'd give him half a chance. But if he had no fight scheduled, then it looks a bad one. Joe Smith's one of the biggest punchers in the division. He's a big light heavyweight. He was a sparring partner of mine when I was spending time out in New York. So we sparred a number of rounds together. Strong boy, game as they come, can punch and takes a punch quite well as well. So he's a problem for anyone in and amongst the 175s, and I don't give this guy much of an opportunity at all, I'm sorry to say. So I was looking forward to seeing Callum Johnson in with him, I really was, because Callum is a strong fighter with a big punch of his own, and I think it was a genuine fight, 60-40 in Joe Smith Jr.'s favour.
Yeah, it's disappointing, and I'm with you. It's going to be difficult for Steve Geffrard to really do anything against Joe Smith, who's, look, he's got a world title. He's one of the best light heavies out there, coming off that good win against Maxim Vlasov, who we wanted to see against Joshua Boatsi. So there is real pedigree there with Joe Smith. Blue collar man, they say in America, and I expect him to get the win by stoppage. He's such a big puncher. And I think once he connects with a guy that maybe hasn't been in the gym, hasn't had a camp for this fight either, will make the weight. We fingers crossed and hope he does, but I think Joe Smith's going to get the job done. So yeah, I'm going for a Joe Smith win by stoppage as well. Tony, as always, my man, thank you very, very much. This has been the Dazn Boxing Show. See you all again next week.